Ciao, Ni Hao, Yasu, Bonjour, Guten Tag. My name is Lydia, and I'm your host of the Global Travel Junkie podcast, where we'll discover new luxury destinations and experiences together. So let's get started and meet today's guest. Hello, everyone. It's Lydia with the Global Travel Junkie podcast and YouTube channel. And today, I always say this. I always say I'm so excited to introduce you to our next guest, but it's true. I say that because it's so true. And today, you guys, we're going to go to the Galapagos Islands and Patagonia, and we're here with Fernando Diez to take us on that journey through this podcast. And so let's go ahead and welcome Fernando. Hi, Fernando.
Hi, Lydia. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm so glad we were able to get connected. So tell us a little bit about yourself and Quasar Expeditions.
Perfect. Well, I've been working in this industry for about 17 years, but it actually started way before that. In addition to being the director of marketing for Quasar, I'm also the son of the founders. So my parents, the two of them, started the company back in 1986. And so, as you can understand, I grew up in these places, mainly in the Galapagos. I'm originally from Ecuador.
Oh, I was wondering.
I'm based in Santiago de Chile now. But all my life, basically up until I was around 28 years old when I moved to Chile, I spent it in Ecuador and the Galapagos. And so, as you can understand, growing up in a place like this, even though we always had a choice, and I say we because I'm including my two brothers who also work in the company in different positions, we always had a choice as to what we wanted to do with our lives. But it was like magnetic. And so we all ended up working at Quasar. I'm in the marketing department. My younger brother is in sales, and then my older brother is actually the president of the company. And we really, really enjoyed it. There's enormous satisfaction in treating people to adventures that they'll never forget in these wonderful destinations. And that's why, I've been doing this for the past 17 years. This is what I see myself doing moving forward. And I just think everybody, regardless of age, physical abilities, interests, whatever, you just have to go to places like Galapagos and Patagonia. They are life-changing experiences.
Yeah, well, not only does it seem like a dream expedition and experience, but that sounds like a dream job to me.
It is. We really, really enjoy it.
Great. So that's neat that all your brothers decided to do it with you. So I know that it's definitely a family experience. And when you go to the website, and I encourage everybody to do that and go watch the video that they have on there. I know y'all talk about even the guest, even the travelers who experience a Quasar expedition also feel like family, right? That's the way they're treated. So I love that. So let's dive in. I want to give our listeners just a really great opportunity to understand what is Quasar about and why do y'all do all the things that you do? Because I know you go the extra mile, not only for the customers or the clients, but for the planet. Let's talk about those kinds of things.
Perfect. So, as I said, it all started, it actually started before 1986, which is when the company was founded. It started in 1969. My mother was, just 16. She had a really, those professors or teachers that you have in school that really inspire you. She had one of those, and it was her biology teacher who told them that there was a Navy ship going out from Guayaquil in mainland Ecuador out to the Galapagos once a week. That was the only way to get there, no flights yet. And that you could actually go on the ship, stay there for a week, which is how long it would take them, to provide all the supplies to the few people that were inhabiting the islands. And you could see the Galapagos in a extremely different way to, what you're able to see, how you're able to see them today. And so my mother, with a group of friends, went on this adventure. 16, you can imagine my grandparents were not thrilled about this. And a Navy ship, they told us, they would share a bathroom with, all the crew, that they had buckets, there in case they got seasick, and it was extremely hot because it was just a very, very uncomfortable ship. But that, I think it was like a 3-day voyage out to the islands was horrible. But then they got to this place that completely blew their minds. And so back then, there were no guides, there were no trails. The Galapagos National Park had recently been established, but they weren't doing much. And so basically, the Navy ship, while they did their operation, they took the girls down on the islands and said, here's a bag of oranges, here's some water. We'll be back in about 4 hours to pick you guys up. Just roam freely. And
You mean they left?
they left.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so there are some photos that you can actually see on the website. My mother, when she got to one of the landing sites, a herd of iguanas just ran up to her, and they were like, she was impressed just by that alone. And what happens was that the iguanas had gotten used to visitors feeding them the oranges. So the oranges actually,
What attracted
were,
them?
and the iguanas were crazy about them, because the only way for them to get fresh water is to, the cactus, the tunas, to fall, the prickly pear cactus. When that falls, that's the only way they get fresh water in their system. And so they have to wait for days under these cacti. And all of a sudden, there are these people with oranges. And so that was her first impression.
And
And then they went to
sweet,
these,
sweet oranges.
yeah, exactly. And then they went to these beaches, and the sea lions were there, and the sea lions were not running away. They were approaching them, and the birds would not move from the trails. Well, sorry, there were no trails, from the places
Where
they
they
were
were
to walk.
walking, yeah.
And they saw a side of wildlife that they had never seen or experienced in their life. And so that experience changed my mom forever. And she decided then, at the age of 16, that she needed to do something with the Galapagos. And so many years later, she met my father, and she took him out to Galapagos. And my father was an entrepreneur by nature, and they went on a very, very uncomfortable large ship. And they said there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way to see the Galapagos. And so Quasar was founded, and we pioneered high-end small ship cruising in the Galapagos. So the first yachts that were comfortable, that had air conditioning, that had good food, and a good crew, and great guides. And that's how Quasar actually started. And so that philosophy of this small group, very intimate travel, as the means to see these wonderful places, is what has transcended to these other destinations. And so not only are we a family company in the literal sense, right? Started by my two parents, and then my brother is working there, and we treat everybody like family. But when you have these small ships, of 16, 32 guests at the most, it is like family, and the crew are like your family, and you're a guest in our home, and that's how we make you feel. And so the crew is extremely friendly. You can see in all the comments that people leave that they say, we felt like we were home. But of course, with all the amenities and the fine service and the
I was
high-end
gonna say, I bet it's
accommodations.
better than making it home, right?
Yeah, you don't need to make your
Unless they
bed.
have
You
a
don't need.
butler.
So you
Let
have all these amazing comforts and extras that are part of like a luxury operation, but in the end, it's very, very laid back feeling. And I think people, um, the guests really become friends in the end, and they enjoy the places like, as with their families. And so that's the Quasar experience, and that's why the company, I think, is successful today, is because people look for those sort of unique, more intimate experience in these remote destinations.
Yeah. So we just dove in. So I'm going to just do a little bit of making a few assumptions for the listeners, because listeners can come across a podcast and just start listening and they may not even know what we're talking about. So let me just do some little basics and you tell me if I'm wrong or not. But basically, the Galapagos is about 900 to 1,000 kilometers in the Pacific Ocean, down in the bottom of South America, and the closest country is Ecuador. And right, am I correct?
Yes, the Galapagos Islands belong to Ecuador. They're right
Okay.
on the equator. So it's like
That's what I was
actually
going to
more
ask you.
toward
How
the top
far
of
is
South
the
America.
equator? Yeah.
Yeah, so they're right on the equator. Actually, in some of the crossings, we take people to the bridge to actually see on the GPS the 000 latitude.
That's
Um,
amazing.
and so they belong to the country of Ecuador. And I think one of the things that Ecuador has done really, really well, despite the fact that it's a third world country and it has all the problems of, third world countries, the Galapagos National Park and the way Ecuador has preserved the Galapagos is fantastic. And so to get to Galapagos, unfortunately, there are no international flights directly to Galapagos. So you have to fly first to the capital city of Quito in Ecuador or to the coastal city of Guayaquil. Those are the two international airports,
Okay.
and then take a connecting flight. So for most people, it means arriving at least a day before their cruise starts so that they can take the early flight out to the islands and join the cruise. But most of our guests actually arrive several days earlier because exploring mainland Ecuador also has its amazing benefits. You have the Amazon jungle, you have the Andes highlands, and so there's just a lot to do aside from the Galapagos in Ecuador.
And I was in my research, I was seeing that there's like two airports for the Galapagos Islands when you're flying in. And which one are the expeditions closest to?
Perfect. So actually, our expeditions start in one and end in the other.
Okay.
And so we take care of the flights for guests. They don't have to worry about that part. But you normally start on Baltra Island and end in San Cristobal Island, or
Okay.
vice versa.
Okay.
And we do that so that we don't have to navigate all the way back, to the same airport and just, spend that day navigating
Yeah,
just,
wasting
for
time.
logistics. Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead, our itineraries are set up in a way that we start in one and end in the other.
Yeah. And do y'all pick up a new tour group on the next one? So y'all
Yep,
organize it that way. So you've always got somebody you're taking in one direction or the other.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Great. So I had a question. Oh, are the planes from the Ecuador, once you get in the international airport and then you go onto the plane, are these like little puddle jumpers, or how big are the planes that go into the islands?
Yeah. So no, um, if you're familiar with airplane models, normally they're the Airbus, the A319s and
Wow.
A320s. So
Okay.
these are for 150 passengers. So there's plenty
Those
of
are big.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah, these
Yeah.
are they're not obviously the huge planes, but yeah, all the comforts, and they're like the normal planes with turbines. They're not the propeller engines, and so
Yeah.
like with most domestic flights inside of the United States, it's same planes.
This was a question I had, and then we're gonna get deeper into your stuff. But like, I saw on your website there was like a little, like a disability symbol, like for like a wheelchair type symbol. Can people who are, in wheelchairs, like someone who's elderly, can they go on a trip like this, or is it challenging on the boat?
So we have had, and we actually have not too many, but a few guests that come, in a wheelchair every year. It is not easy to disembark in many of these places. We had, for example, an Paralympian. His name is Chris Waddell, and but obviously, as an Olympian, he actually did all the trails by himself. But that's normally an exception. Um, I do recommend that if somebody, is in a wheelchair, probably the larger boats are better in that
More
respect.
accommodating. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
But in general, most of the landing sites in Galapagos do require you to disembark on uneven terrain, in wet landings right on beaches. So it's unfortunately not as easy, but
Yeah.
we do welcome disabled people every year. And
Yeah.
it just depends on the condition, that how much they can see and do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it may be like a group, a family, and there's maybe one person that they need to consider whether or not they'd be able to go or not. That's the only reason why I asked. So let's go into a little bit deeper. Let's start with the Galapagos. We've talked about the getting on, the boat. What kind of happens when we embark on the boat, and how many days are we on this trip, and where are we sleeping? And is this a day trip?
Perfect. So that's a great question. Um, did I freeze for a bit? Oh, there we go.
No, you're
Um,
here.
It's a great question, and it's actually, Lydia, one of the most common mistakes made by first-time Galapagos travelers is
Uh-huh.
not leaving enough time to actually see the island. So most people, when they think of cruising, maybe a 4-day cruise in the Bahamas, so let's do a 4-day cruise in Galapagos. So there are a few considerations there. First of all, the day you get to Galapagos and you board the ship, and the day you actually disembark and return to the mainland, those days are mainly spent traveling. So, for example, if you do one of the 4-night cruises, essentially it's only 2 days in Galapagos. So, making it all the way down to Ecuador and South America and then to Galapagos just to spend 2 days in the islands, for me, is a terrible, terrible mistake. Of course, the shorter cruises are less expensive. So if budget is really an issue, then yes, of course, rather than not seeing the Galapagos, do see them, in a 4-night cruise. But Quasar, for example, we only offer 7 and 14-night cruises. Um,
Wonderful.
yeah, and it basically was sort of like a coincidence. When Quasar started, there was only one flight out to the islands, and this flight was once a week. So the cruises were coordinated around this one flight, and it was 1 week cruises. And we found out over the course of the years that that was actually the ideal duration. Like in 1 week, you could see a lot of what the Galapagos has to offer. Now, for people who have more time and greater budget, the back-to-back trips with Quasar, those are the recommended, the 14-night cruises, because you don't. Sorry, let me backtrack a bit. There's a law in the Galapagos National Park that you can't visit the same visitor site, but every 15 days. So our two itineraries are very different from one another. The itineraries repeat every 15 days. So for somebody that comes in 15 days, it's not the same itinerary twice. It's two totally different itineraries that then repeat themselves every 15 days,
So
if
they'll
that makes
see
sense.
different places in those 15 days. They never go to the same stop.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And so we call that the ultimate Galapagos experience. And we understand, not everybody has, 14 nights to spend on a cruise, or perhaps the budget, but if you do, definitely that's the recommendation. And what you do in that week, Lydia, is you, when guests disembark, they never imagined that they would pack so much adventure in 1 week. And these are expedition cruises, right? There is a very important distinction to be made with the regular cruises where you spend a lot of time on the boat, eating and onboard entertainment. That's not what expedition cruising is about in Galapagos. We're really only on the boats at night, traveling from one island to another. And so we don't have guests spend their time on the boat in the day, moving from one island to the next. The travel happens by night. And then during the day, basically to, shower, siesta, and meals. And that's about it. And the rest of the time we're exploring, we are doing walks and hikes around the islands. We're kayaking in mangroves and the shores. We're taking dinghy rides or pangas. These are the inflatable zodiacs, to see orcas feeding or explore mangroves and see the shark nurseries. Or basically, we're snorkeling, and that's the favorite activity of about 95% of the people who travel with us. The snorkeling in Galapagos is absolutely amazing. It's a little different from what you get in the Caribbean, where there's a lot of tropical fish and warm waters and just
Coral.
small,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of coral. Galapagos is more about the bigger animals. So you'll snorkel with sea lions, you'll snorkel with sea turtles, penguins, the only penguins that actually live north of the equator in the world, in Galapagos. And because the Galapagos waters are very nutrient rich, they're often a little bit colder than what you get in the Caribbean, but we provide wetsuits to make it super comfortable. But snorkeling for anybody interested in the Galapagos is highly, highly recommended. And so if you've never snorkeled before, doing a little bit of training in a pool or actually in the beach really helps so that you can enjoy and maximize your time in this activity.
I mean, there's a whole world under the sea, right? I mean,
Indeed.
my first snorkeling was like in Cozumel, and so there was a lot of coral and life and everything in Mexico with turtles and things. So it's just when I did it the first time, this was 25 years ago or 30 years ago, I was just like, oh my goodness, there's so much life and activity under here that we have no idea unless you stick your head in the water and learn how to breathe through a tube so you can stay down there. Right. So I highly encourage anyone, get ready, like get prepared before you go, because you want to do snorkeling, right? Once you're there. Okay. So that's a wonderful, overview. Well, we didn't talk about, so there's how many people, so you sleep on the boat, right? And how many, you said 32 people max, but I'm sure that doesn't mean that's how much, how many rooms and stuff you have on the boat.
Right. So we have 2 yachts with a 3rd yacht coming. Our largest yacht, the Evolution, is for 32 guests in 16 cabins.
Okay.
And you have different categories from the deluxe to the premium staterooms and then the suites.
Yeah.
And then we have the Grace, which is even more intimate, only for 16 guests in 9 cabins. Grace yacht was actually, it's named after Grace Kelly because it was her yacht in the 1950s.
Wow.
When she married Prince Rainier in what they called the wedding of the century. Back then, Prince Rainier was very good friends with Aristotle Onassis, and he actually gifted the yacht to Prince Rainier when they married, because I guess that's what you do when you have that amount of money. And so the yacht belonged to the Principality of Monaco for about 5-6 years. And when Quasar acquired the yacht in 2009, it had many names throughout its history, and we decided to take her back to what we felt were her most elegant and the best times. And so we named her Grace after Grace Kelly.
I love that.
And there's a ton of history. The yacht is full of photos of the princes aboard the yacht with the prince. They honeymooned aboard that yacht. That's why it's also a great alternative for honeymooners. We get a lot of honeymooners, booking the Grace Kelly suite for a week-long adventure in the Galapagos. So that yacht is a little different. And then the Evolution, as I said, which is a little larger, it tends to be better for families too, a little bit more space. Than the Grace. The Grace with its classic lines has that classic hull. And it's still a very spacious yacht and a lot of outside space, especially to enjoy the wonderful weather of the Galapagos. But the Evolution is a little bit larger. And so depending on your style of travel, you could choose either yacht. But what I do recommend, to anybody listening is, the largest ship size allowed to cruise the Galapagos is only 100 guests. All right. When you think about that, you would consider that small ship cruising pretty much anywhere in the world, right? Most cruise ships that we're used to, 500, 1,000, 3,000 passengers. But in Galapagos, because it's such a fragile environment, because the wildlife, is so sensitive to people, that 100 passengers in a ship is the equivalent of 1,000 or 3,000 passengers disembarking in a port town in the Mediterranean, for example. And so even though the cruise companies that own these larger ships, they do call these small ship cruises, at least to us, they are too invasive. The small ship cruising is the way to go. A small number of guests, a much lighter footprint. And you're really able to explore Galapagos as Darwin did, many, many centuries ago, because that's the way the islands are meant to be experienced.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good segue into the part of the beginning of the podcast when I said that y'all are responsible to the planet as well. So let's go ahead and talk. You're talking about a smaller footprint. Let's help people understand, people who aren't in a sustainability mindset or the consciousness of hearing those types of terms like footprint. Let's go ahead and talk about how does Quasar give back to the planet by all the actions that you have to go above and beyond the typical behavior in order to be responsible with coming into an environment and leaving no, let's just say, footprint, there when you leave, right? You take it all out with you, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And we say, take only photos and leave only footprints. The responsibility that we have as a company, and today, I don't even think if the right term is a responsibility. It's kind of like it's our job. I think it's the basics today to be a socially and environmentally responsible company. The days of that being optional, I think, are over. And it's not only our job as the people who provide the tours and who own the ships to be a sustainable company. It's also the job of the traveler to choose a company that is sustainable, that is responsible with the environment and with the community, because that's the only way that travel can be sustainable in the long term. That's the only way the communities, will thrive, that the wildlife would be protected, the destinations will be protected. So I highly encourage anybody who travels that they put that all in their, or, you know, great rooms, great food. Yes, that's perfect. But also having a strong, sustainable agenda, that has to be a requirement, for the companies that you choose.
Will you give us some questions to ask so that we ask the right questions when it comes to someone determining who they're going to work with? Like what are some of the questions we can ask that help us know that they are doing this sustainable thing?
Exactly. Yeah. So one of the, I guess, maybe more common questions to ask has to do with climate change, right? And so carbon offsetting. What does the company that you're going to travel with do in terms of carbon offsetting? Quasar is not 100% carbon-free operation. We're in that process, but we're very far along that process. We do offset the emissions of the engines of our yachts, which are the biggest producers of CO2. We also offset the emissions of all our Jeeps in Patagonia, plus the stay. We have reforestation programs both in Patagonia and in the Galapagos that not only help, they're native tree reforestation, so they not only help to restore these native tree forests in the destination, but they also help, of course, to absorb a ton of CO2 from the air and produce a ton of oxygen. And in addition to that, we work with a company called Tomorrow's Air. And what they do is, most companies today work on carbon offsetting, and carbon offsetting essentially is cleaning up for the mess we're making, right? But what about the mess that has been made for, the last 100, 200, 300 years, and all that carbon that's stuck in the atmosphere? Tomorrow's Air actually extracts that carbon, and they, through these amazing, cutting edge technologies, they convert it into compressed carbon and they bury it under the ground. And that is the way to really get rid of it. And so we support that company through the donations that our guests make. And for every dollar that our guests, contribute, Quasar contributes also another dollar. So for example, when you book a trip with Quasar, there is this, let's call it a sustainability fee, which is only about $50 for the whole trip. That helps to offset the emissions of your flights, of the ships, to help with, a company like Tomorrow's Air. And in addition, Quasar will put another $50, to really help the environment.
So y'all match it.
Exactly, we match it. So at least on the carbon offsetting or the climate change front, That's what Quasar does. And it's, if every company would take that initiative, the travel, which is a huge, huge
Contributor.
Exactly, to the climate change problem. The transportation and travel are huge, but at the same time, we are also a huge contributors to the preservation of these destinations. And people have, they will not protect what they don't know, so they have to get there, and so they have to take the transportation and the airplanes, and so the emissions. So as long as you're a responsible traveler and you offset your emissions, you're good. And there, websites like the Carbon Fund, that you can actually calculate the emissions of your trip. So even if you're traveling to a place that does not offer this, as part of the trip, you can just, plug in your flights, let them know what you will be doing. If you're staying in a hotel, for how many nights, they calculate the emissions, and then you just, pay a small fee to offset your emissions. And people are often surprised by how small the fee is to actually, but when it accumulates, right, that's when we have a problem like we do today. And so that's what we do on one front. And then, another part, a big part, is wildlife protection, at least in the Galapagos. So Quasar collaborates very closely with the Charles Darwin Foundation and the Galapagos Conservation Trust. We donate cabins every year that are auctioned off, and those funds, help protect these wildlife. The problem of invasive species is huge in Galapagos. With all these cargo ships coming to bring provisions, they bring, cockroaches, the normal housefly, which you would not consider an invasive species, is responsible for the near extinction of the mangrove finch. And people don't know that, and it's how difficult it is, you can imagine, to get rid of a housefly that is just living everywhere. They lay eggs in the nest of the mangrove finch, and the larvae actually enter the ear of the hatchlings.
Aww,
and so the hatchlings don't have a chance to make it. And so these sort of initiatives we support that are not evident, to the normal traveler, but through the Charles Darwin Foundation. And of course, we educate people about this on our trips. And then the final thing is the communities, right? They're in these remote, wonderful destinations like Patagonia or the Galapagos. There are people living and thriving off of these places. But travel also is a big part of the problem, at least in Galapagos. Waste management is terrible in Galapagos. There are problems too with just a growing population that the islands cannot sustain, because there are lots of jobs and well-paying jobs. And so we work together with the communities to educate the kids. We have the Galapagos Scouts project, through which we empower and educate the children to become, the leaders of Galapagos for tomorrow. We provide sponsorship for them to go to college in the mainland to really learn, become masters at what they do, and hopefully, come back to the Galapagos and work there and be the ones that make the change.
Yeah, like ambassadors to protect their lands. Yeah,
exactly. And it has to come from the locals. They love these places. They're protecting their home, but they need to, be educated and have the resources to be able to do that. So we do that both in Galapagos and Patagonia, really working with the locals to make the destinations better.
I love that. And you know what? I'm going to share another one that I read on your website that hasn't been mentioned. And it resonated with me because for 8 years, I worked at a restaurant who became the greenest restaurant in all of the USA. And what did that mean? We did more things because the restaurant industry is one of the largest contributors to waste in the world. So the more conscious you are about what you do to be sustainable when you're running a restaurant minimizes the impact the negative impact that you make on the planet. So I noticed on your website that y'all do not use single-use plastics, right?
Yes.
And so to anyone who doesn't know what that is, I'm just going to give you an example. Yesterday, I went to a restaurant, and inside the straw, which is a single-use plastic, it was encased in a plastic. And so I had to remove the plastic to get to the plastic That's two things that could have been avoided by using a more sustainable style straw, like a paper straw or something that breaks down. So is that what the not using single use plastics represent on your website, or am I wrong?
Yeah, exactly. And straws is a great example. We also have a production kitchen in the mainland. So a lot of the plastic is eliminated in the mainland where there are many options to recycle it. And the food comes packaged in a very different way that's friendly for the Galapagos, to be able to use it. And we partnered actually with the World Wildlife Fund on this food waste initiative. And you couldn't imagine, Lydia, when they did the audit of our yachts many years ago, how much food was being wasted. And we normally think, when it's a luxury operation, there has to be excess, right? And so, buffets that are endless and there's a lot of food being wasted. And we really had to rethink that part. And, working with these very, very talented chefs that work with the World Wildlife Fund, we're actually repurposing the food that hasn't been touched for the crew members so that they don't feel like they're eating leftovers, but repurpose in a way that is absolutely delicious. And we're reusing all this food. So actually the waste that we have in the form of food today is minimal. And that was one of the biggest problems for Quasar, not just because of the waste that we were producing, but also the money we were throwing down the drain basically for food that wasn't consumed. So today it's a much more efficient operation in that sense. And it's incredible how much less waste is coming out of our ships every week.
That's wonderful. And I know, like, when you're chopping up like a carrot or something and you throw away the end or you have a little excess, I mean, even things like that, I'm sure your chefs are probably have like composting containers where they can put all that stuff in, then they drop it off at port and somebody uses it to help enrich the soil or something, like in somewhere. I don't know. I'm just wondering.
Yeah,
It's probably
it's
something like
exactly.
that. We used to do something like that.
We do it. Yes, exactly. It's called Huerta Luna, and they have an organic farm, and all of organic waste goes to them, and they use it for composting and for the soil. So it's exactly what you say, and it's incredible. Like if you adopt this habit, which we highly encourage people, like when you travel with Quasar, you learn about all these things that are happening on board.
Right.
And many of these people, they come back at home and they're like, okay, I'm
Let's
really
do
going to take
that.
recycling seriously.
Yeah.
When you actually separate the organic components from the non-organic and the recyclable from the non-recyclable, it's incredible how little waste actually needs to go to like a landfill, right? Versus something that can be recycled or can be composted or whatever. It's incredible. So I highly encourage, anybody listening here to give that a try and to research that a little bit more because, it starts
Yeah.
with one person, right? And then, we all can make a difference if we start.
It does. And it takes people like you and me to get excited about sustainability because, like you're talking about, it's a lot of extra work to sort your trash and do these things. So it takes that extra step. That's what we're talking about when you go the extra mile instead of just dumping everything in a trash bag and then dumping it in some kind of a landfill. We at our, greenest restaurant in the United States, we diverted 80% of our waste out of the landfills and into other destinations. So it's really exciting. So you're talking my language when you're talking sustainability. I've been doing this for 15 years, so I love this
That's amazing.
aspect. I love the aspect of Quasar Expeditions focusing on the planet as part of their traveling experience. So thank you for sharing that. So, do you think, I know your food, I just want to mention, like, I know the chefs are like top notch and you have really fine dining type meals I saw in the pictures. Am I correct?
Yep. With a key difference, at least to our competitors in both destinations, in both Galapagos and Patagonia, is, most of the people who travel with us, they have the money to go to a fine Italian restaurant, French restaurant, anywhere in the world, right? And most of them actually have those great restaurants home. So when you
Experiences,
come to
right?
a place like Ecuador and the Galapagos, you don't want to have another version of a filet mignon, right? Well,
Right.
maybe you do, but that's not what we offer. Um, we make it so that part of the journey that people are taking is also in the culinary sense, that they're also taking a journey with the food, that they're trying new stuff, they had never tried before. Ecuador has over 50 varieties of potatoes, just potatoes alone, all colors, sizes, textures. And so, rethinking what a potato is and really understanding what the Andean potato is all about is part of the adventure. Exotic fruits, fruits of all shapes and sizes and textures and tastes that you've never imagined. Fruit juices that are extraordinary, that people have never tried, and then they end up being their favorite. Um, that is what the dining experience with Quasar is all about, and of course, always thoughtfully sourced, and just sustainable in every sense. So working with local food providers, not buying tomatoes from the massive tomato producer in the mainland, but from the organic farm right there in Galapagos. So we're not only helping the community, but these are organic tomatoes that are grown there that help the people there to make this a sort of like a sustainable economy too. And in the end, the taste of these tomatoes that are very far, at least in the looks, from what you see in a supermarket. So they're not perfectly round and red, visually appealing to, what we think of a tomato, but they're ugly looking, but they taste 100 times better. Right. And so
Don't judge a book
that
by
is
its cover.
that's what the culinary experience with Quasar is all about. We want to immerse you in the destination. We want you to really get a taste of what Chilean or Ecuadorian food is all about, and that it's a journey through all the senses. And so
Yeah.
food is very important to most people, and we try to represent and honor the culture, the traditions, and the country that people are visiting in the food that they eat on our trips.
This sounds like a good time to just mention that y'all are very specific about tailoring and customizing the expedition to the traveler and not just a tourist, that you see every guest as the traveler's experience, right? Is there anything about that we should mention before we move on to the guides? I want to talk a little bit about the relationship
Yeah.
with the guides.
Yeah, so in that respect, the difference is immediately visible for guests the moment they pick up the phone and talk to our expedition designers. It's not the regular questions like, okay, what dates and how many people are traveling, but really it's like, Lydia, what do you like to travel? What has been the best adventure you've taken in your life? What are your top few trips and what were the things you really liked? Okay, so you really enjoy horseback riding, for example. Let's get you in on a authentic hacienda experience before Galapagos. Go horseback riding in the Andes, and then we go to Galapagos to enjoy the magic of the islands. And so being able to understand each person, each family, and treat everybody individually so that we create these tailor-made journeys that are life-changing, that they hit on all the perfect spots, right? They're really customized for you, and you're doing the things you enjoy. And we also make sure to take you a little bit out of your comfort zone. We have found over the years that that is part of the recipe for life-changing experiences. So people, we often get people who's like, oh, thanks, I'll do all the activities in Galapagos, but I won't do the snorkeling because I'm not comfortable in the water. I'm afraid of snorkeling. And so to those people, we help them. We have special life vests for snorkeling, and we pair them up so that their snorkeling buddy is the naturalist guide so that they feel super comfortable. And by day 2 and day 3, it's their favorite activity,
They're
and
off on the road.
they return home having experienced something new because we took them out of their comfort zone, and because we gave them this opportunity to see the world in a different way. And so we don't let you just say, no, I don't want to do that. Unless of course there's a very, very
Unless you
valid
demand
reason.
it.
Yeah.
um,
But
well, I want to say in that regard, that sounds like a good segue into the fact that y'all are not only providing like a travel style experience, you're actually offering a spiritual experience as well. I heard that on your video, and in that regard, being pushed a little bit past your comfort zone, but then the feeling that you achieved something that you were afraid of, and you overcame it, you surpassed your expectations of what this trip could provide for you on an emotional, mental, and spiritual level, right? I mean, that's just a good example of being afraid of the water, snorkeling, and then having a whole new experience with everything under the sea that you've never been able to achieve before this time.
exactly. And for some people, it's big steps like that. We have plenty of people coming to Galapagos who they've watched the movie Jaws many times, and they're terrified to see a shark, while snorkeling. And seeing reef sharks in Galapagos while snorkeling, to me, is one of the most fascinating things you can see. There has never been a shark attack, to a
Well, I was
snorkeler
going
in
to say,
Galapagos.
aren't most sharks not attackers? Like,
Exactly.
they're scared of you, right?
Yeah, they're literally like 2 or 3 species that are a little bit more aggressive.
Aggressive, yeah.
Like the tiger shark, the bull shark, or the
And the
white
great
shark.
white.
Those do not exist right in the Galapagos.
Oh,
And so,
really?
yeah,
Wow.
you only have these smaller sharks that are a lot more docile, and they literally ignore you. And so, seeing a shark and
You're
snorkeling
like,
right above it
you're trying to get
is,
to one. Come here, come
yeah,
back.
it's fantastic. And so, overcoming that fear it's one of these transformational moments for most people. That's where the spiritual change happens. But for most people, they don't have that fear of snorkeling or maybe of sharks, but it's these little things, these little transformations. Maybe the thing we were talking about being a lot more responsible with waste. And so that's like, okay, I'm a better person by having taken this trip because I
Right.
now know how to recycle. Or the fact that you engaged with a member of the community, either in the Andes or in Galapagos, and you became, really good friends, and you understood how they live and see their perspective. And often in these rural communities, at least in the Andes, you realize that happiness has nothing to do with money, which is often, in the
A
Western world, at
perception.
least, yeah, we associate it, right? We need money to be happy. And then you visit these communities where the kids and the adults are extremely, extremely happy, and to our standards, they have nothing. And it's those type of transformations, those little things that you see and do in the expeditions, that in the end, give way for these journeys that really change you on a spiritual level.
Well, and the awe, I mean, let's look at the photos behind us. The awe inspiring, like, this is our planet. This is such a gift for us to be able to see such amazing diversity in ecosystems and in structure and geological formations. And think about how many thousands and thousands of years this has been here, way before we were even here inhabiting this. And it just gives you a new reverence and a new respect for the earth that we actually live on, and we can go see it with one of your tours. Right?
Exactly. And things that you maybe saw in biology class, or at some point during your education, actually come to life in these destinations. In Patagonia, for example, right behind one of those peaks that's behind you, they found the largest dinosaur in the world. And the fact that you can actually go to that place and you can see the excavations happening, and you can see, this uplifted ocean floor that's full of fossils and things like that, it just changes your perspective of what, Earth used to look like. And then in Galapagos, uh, the islands are still forming today. Some are 4 million years old, and some are, 4 years old, because the last eruption was just very, very recently. And so it's really seeing nature at its best at work, and we're nature's guest in these places. We really you can feel the power of nature, where we're just, tiny visitors there, and they can get rid of us very quickly if they
Of
wanted to.
course, the argument you had with your partner the night before suddenly becomes not important,
Oh
right?
yeah.
When you realize how amazing the world really is, and how we're said, like you said, we're just a small little blip on this experience with the planet. That's why we need to be responsible to her. And let's see. No, we've been talking a lot about the Galapagos. I just wanted to mention you do these Patagonia tours as well. Do you want to jump over to Patagonia a little bit real quick? I mean, I know I've seen Jeeps, and help us understand. There's a lot. The Galapagos are mostly on foot. Would I assume that correctly? You're mostly hiking in the Galapagos?
Yeah, it's the walks and hikes and the kayaking or the Zodiac rides, and of course traveling by boat. But in Patagonia, it's actually quite different.
Right.
We don't do the expedition cruising there. We do these overland safaris.
Okay.
Quasar, we're not just a cruising company. We offer the most ideal means to explore the destination. And obviously these two national parks, Torres del Paine in Chile and Los Glaciares in Argentina, they're inland, right? So you can't explore them on a boat. So the next best alternative is these intimate private or small group expeditions in these Jeep vehicles that were, built for this type of terrain. And we call them an overland safari because essentially, it's like an African safari where you're going from point A to point B, admiring the wildlife, staying at different places around the national park, and just exploring these parks and the wildlife and the amazing formations like the ones you see behind you every day. And that's what we do in Patagonia, having taken all of the experience that we had with Galapagos. So our Patagonia programs have only been around for 10 years, where Galapagos is close to 40. But all that experience that came from Galapagos into, the quality of the guides, the type of transformational experiences that need to happen, the experience with the food that we talked about, all that, of course, is carried over. And so it's these equally amazing expeditions happening in Patagonia, but of course, a little bit different to accommodate to the setting and the places that we are exploring. But Patagonia, one thing to note is that most people consider it a destination, for very active people, for hikers. And, that couldn't be further from the truth today. Today, Patagonia is for absolutely everyone. If you like photography, you can go on this trip without requiring much physical activity. There are navigations. If you're a hardcore hiker, of course, this is the Mecca, to these amazing emblematic hikes all over the national parks. But you can also, maybe do just 1 or 2 days of these more difficult or longer hikes, and then the rest of the day just spend them at leisure, enjoying, the properties, navigations, short walks. And so again, Patagonia is absolutely for everyone, and I highly recommend it. It's equally as stunning as the Galapagos Islands with its own attraction, right? The wildlife that you see in Galapagos is probably one of the main attraction in the islands, or in Patagonia, it's more about these majestic landscapes and these contrasts of that you see only in the extremes of the earth. And so it's beautiful. They literally bring tears to your eyes when you see some of the landscapes in Patagonia that you've only thought, existed in dreams, or that you had only seen in photos. But those colors and the cloud formations and just having these granite giants coming out of these electric blue lakes, it's real in Patagonia, and you can see it on the Quasar Experience.
That's amazing. I just want to invite you, because we, spent 50 minutes talking about the Galapagos. If you want to come back and do a separate conversation specifically about Patagonia, I would invite you to let us record one of those, so people who are specifically looking for Patagonia can hear all about that. I mean, is there enough to discuss just the Patagonia expeditions on a separate?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can talk for days on both destinations. And just to that point, Lydia, yeah, the reason, because Quasar started in the Galapagos, that's where, we focused, of course, more in this conversation on
Oh,
that. But
yeah.
yes, I'd be happy to come back and talk all about Patagonia, because
Yeah.
there's so much to see and do there. It's a fantastic
Well,
place.
the reason is because regarding podcast and YouTube videos, people search for
Yeah.
specific low destinations. And so if we talk about the Galapagos, and everybody who wants to know about visiting the Galapagos, they'll be researching that. And then I don't want them to miss out on learning about Patagonia, but nobody wants to sit on this podcast for another 20 minutes talking about that. So I want to invite you to come back and re-record. So when we
Let's
wrap
do it.
this up, we can decide if you have time right now. We can jump on a separate video. So let's just finish up at the Galapagos and see if there's anything that I didn't ask you that we think the listeners need to know before we end the Galapagos conversation.
You briefly brought this up, the guides.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
The
Lydia, I
special
would say,
opportunity to connect with these guides in the
yeah.
Galapagos.
And
Let's talk about that.
yeah, and a good guide is the difference between, an okay or a good experience in Galapagos and the trip of a lifetime. These, as many of our guests say, the guides make the animals and the destination come to life. These are extremely passionate locals, and that's very important to note that in Galapagos, Quasar works with local guides who are showing you their home, who are extremely talented in the sense, that they do this every week. And for them, when they're showing you a sea lion or an orca or whatever, it is like their first time. People cannot perceive the difference. They're like, they literally say, I can't understand how they are so excited, or as excited as we are, assuming, that they see this every week, or, not every week, but they just see it a lot of it. And so it's a very special group of people who can truly be magnificent naturalist guides. And Quasar, thanks to the almost 40 years in Galapagos, is proud to say, that we work with the best guides in the islands. Quasar
Right.
started the first school of guides in Galapagos. So many of the guides that you actually see today working for, competitors, they actually came from the Quasar school guide. And so we formed these people, and they have these natural talents that are complemented with a great education from the experts that Quasars bring. And so the guides just make a real difference. They're extremely friendly, they're funny, they're very professional, always have safety as their number one priority. And they show you a side of Galapagos and of Patagonia that few people get to see, because they have that expertise. Just one example is, there's a snorkeling in Tagus Cove, and one of our guide knows exactly where the seahorses hang out. And you could be snorkeling in front of the coral and have the seahorse in your face, and you would not see him. These guys camouflage perfectly, and so he knows where they live, and they take you to see a seahorse,
He's got
which
their
many of
address.
us will never see in real life, maybe only in an aquarium. And so it's these little details that happen all the time, every day, in every activity, that stack up for these amazing experiences. And the guides are a huge, huge part of that.
Fernando, I believe that we're all connected. We're connected to the plants, we're connected to the animals. As humans, we are all connected by a common energy. And I believe that when you have reverence towards the animals, they know it. And so those seahorses probably know this guide and know that they respect and revere the animals, and so they even probably show up for the guide where maybe they won't show up for another one. And I just wanted to say that it just reminds me of the best of the best. And so the greatest of all time, those are the guides that want to work with Quasar, because you've been around for 40 years. I mean, who wouldn't want to be working for the best of the best? So I can only imagine what an experience at a Quasar expedition is like. And it sounds like a dream. It sounds like an amazing experience. So do you want to say anything before we say goodbye?
Well, just, I highly encourage anybody, even if it's not with Quasar, go to these destinations. There's a reason why we're there. And, not just because Quasar is there. I think you should see Galapagos and Patagonia. These are life-changing places. These are places that will change your perspective of our natural world. It'll make you, I think travel makes people better people. They open you to scenario situations and just conditions in general that open your mind, and Galapagos and Patagonia are certainly two of those destinations. I highly encourage you to make enough time to visit, and I highly encourage you to do the research so that you see these destinations right, because there's nothing that I hate more than when I go to a destination and I see people just doing it all the wrong way. They're taking the wrong tour. They're seeing things the wrong way. They're taking the tourist trap tours or the touristy approach. When, as our motto says, because you're an adventurer, not a tourist, we want you to explore these destinations as adventurers. And there's a very specific recipe that you have to follow for these life-changing experiences in both destinations. And, Quasar and a few other companies in each of these destinations have that experience. And so doing the research, picking the right company will make all the difference between how wonderful your trip could be and how these memories just are going to live with you for the rest of your life.
That's right. Ask the right questions. So I know for people to get started, they want to go to QuasarEX.com. That's QuasarEX.com. And are y'all on social? Can anyone start following you in social settings, social media?
Yes. You can QuasarEX as well on Instagram. On Facebook, it's Quasar Expeditions. But if you just search for Quasar Expeditions, both in Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, we're on all those platforms. That's where we share a lot of visual content, all our videos, all our specials. So yes, by all means, anybody listening, start following us on social, and just browse around our website, watch our videos, and we'd be very happy to welcome you in one of our life-changing adventures. Sorry about that. Wow.
That sounds like a life-saving adventure. So sounds good. So you're definitely on my bucket list now, and I can't wait to find out more about when I'm going to put y'all on my bucket list. So
you're more than welcome, Lydia.
Thank you. Well, we encourage everyone to go check it out and to add Ecuador, the Galapagos, or even Patagonia on your trips of a lifetime list of where you want to go and how you want to see it. So thank you so much, Fernando, for your time today and sharing all your wonderful stories. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Really enjoyed this.
Yes. Well, we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed the show today. And if you'd like to be a guest on the Global Travel Junkie podcast and YouTube channel, reach out to us at our Contact Us form at globaltraveljunkie.com. We hope to see you out traveling. Adios. Ciao. Au revoir.